esteemed representatives of member states, representatives of educational institutions, the business sector, employer organizations, youth development practitioners, development partners, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the African Union's Commission for Education, Science, Technology and Innovation, and the Africa Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD, welcome to the Continental Africa Creates Jobs 2021. This is the third edition of the Continental Conference since the inception of the Skills Initiative for Africa, SIFA. We last met in 2019 in Addis Ababa, from where the name of the conference was transformed from Talks Jobs to Africa Creates Jobs. In this dialogue, we hope that as stakeholders with a shared interest in the prosperity of our young people, that you will help us to find solutions and innovations that will lead to impact and help build towards a responsive and agile skills and jobs agenda for economic growth for African youth. Let's hear from Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, CEO of AUDA NEPAD. Let's hear him share his vision in line with the theme of this conference.
Today we have the CEO Brownback webinar, and I would like to welcome Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki, the CEO of AUDA NEPAD, who is live here with us today. We also have two esteemed panelists who will be joining us online. I would like to welcome Ms. Trudy Hazenberg, who is the Executive Director of the Trade Law Center. We will also have the privilege to have Mr. Daniel Antwi joining us from Accra. He's the CEO of the African Skills Hub based in Accra, Ghana, as I said earlier. So welcome. Just to give you the background of this webinar, the African Union Commission, Department of Education, Science, Technology and Innovations, and the African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD, will host the Continental African Create Jobs Conference as a virtual event. This event will happen on the 3rd and 4th of November 2021 under the theme Driving a Responsive and Agile Skills and Jobs Agenda and Economic Growth for African Youth. So why did we choose this theme? The theme of this conference arose from reflections that the Skills Initiative for Africa team has been having. First of all, we had organized macroeconomic and labor market studies in 8 African countries. These studies reveal the prevalence of the informal sector across the continent in many countries to a varying degree, but the reality is that about 80% of our economies are informal. On the back of this, member states had ratified the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. This instrument, as you all know here, brings a lot of hopes for trade among member states. There are anticipated opportunities in the African Continental Free Trade area for recovery and growth beyond the pandemic. As you all know, COVID-19 has been a big disruptor in our planning in many countries, in many member states across the world, not just in Africa. Skill gaps have been existing, but they are widening again because of the economic impact of COVID on our countries in Africa. Many firms are looking for skills that are not existing or are not widely present in our market. Many young people find themselves in the informal sector just because they can't find a formal job, and also because out of necessity, because they have to put food on the table. So the question is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement if it is positioned to spur growth, how should skills development system will look like to ensure that our emerging economic sectors find a fit-for-purpose labor force? So today, the African Create Jobs 2021 aims to create a vision for youth for a vibrant and prosperous future. African Create Jobs 2021 will bring together stakeholders at the continental level. We will have policymakers, practitioners in the education and skill development sector, the private sector, of course, because we can't have jobs without the private sector. Development partners and the young people themselves. We need to get the voice of the young people in everything that we are doing. So today, Brown's Bag session, from this webinar Brown Bag session, we seek to have the CEO's guidance and the vision setting in respect of what are the key issues stakeholders should respond to towards more ecosystem-wide responsiveness and agility that leads to improved jobs. So without further ado, I would like to invite our CEO, Dr. Mayaki, to give us his guidance. So, Dr. Mayaki, what does the African Continental Free Trade Agreement mean for the continent's socio-economic development trajectory and road to recovery post the COVID-19? Okay. I know we are still in the COVID-19, but we are already talking about post-COVID. So what does that mean to you?
No, thank you. Thank you, Eric. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I would like to start by congratulating you and the whole team working on SIFA. SIFA, Skills Initiative for Africa, I think is the only continental initiative which has a specific focus on skills. It's not a regional, it's not a national. Well, it has national implementation processes, but continentally it's the only initiative which seriously reflects on this problematic, as the French say, on the issues of skills. So congratulations for the good work that you are doing in partnership with Germany and GIZ, because historically it has been supported by Germany and GIZ. So before responding to your question, I would like to contextualize a little bit historically on 2 points. The first one is Africa has known quite a sound economic growth in the last 20 years. And with the pandemic, we faced for the first time a recession. So but the second point is what the characteristic of that growth which took place because of sound macroeconomic policies, sound public finance management. The characteristic of this growth is that it was not inclusive enough. When you talk about inclusiveness regarding growth, you need to refer to 2 criteria. The first one is reduction of inequality, and the second one is creation of jobs. And evidently, when we refer to the creation of jobs, we have to have in mind that we are talking about what the ILO, the International Labour Organization, called decent jobs. We are not talking about sweatshop jobs. We are talking about decent jobs. So I think it's important to mention that an inclusive growth should be able to create, should be accompanied by decent jobs. And this is important because there are a lot of theories on regarding Africa's trajectories. And some thinkers do think that we will not be able to avoid the Chinese sweatshops because we have massive numbers in terms of unemployment. So still in the contextualization, I would like to refer to the fact that, as you know, and it is documented, when we look at our demographic growth rate, because as you know, we have not finalized our demographic transition. So our demographic growth rates are still between 3.8 and 4.2, which means that on a country which has 20 million inhabitants, which could be, for example, any country in the Sahel or in East Africa, on the employment market, you have roughly between 250,000 and 300,000 cohorts of young coming on the employment market. So these youngsters cannot be employed by the civil service if you take into account the public finance management criteria. Industrialization is incipient, so they cannot be absorbed by an industry, an industrial system. And agricultural transformation has not always taken place, so that the diversification of the rural economy can absorb them. So that's the reason they, with their geniuses, their innovative capacities, they become informal.
Yes,
But
Dr. Mayaki, I'm sorry, let me
yeah, you
please
can interrupt
you
me,
here.
no problem.
You mentioned the trajectory and the fact that we might not avoid the sweatshop.
Some
But
thinkers are
Africa
saying that.
has something that is unique, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
So what are the prospects for African Union member states and also the risk for not getting it right?
I'm not getting there. I'm getting there. But I'm not eluding, I want to say, the question. But I need to contextualize so that my reasoning can make sense, if it does make sense. So these numbers of youngsters coming on the employment market are massive. So you cannot respond to massive challenges without massive solutions. And this is why the Continental Free Trade Agreement was set up, and it has been a very long thinking since the Abuja Treaty, so that Africa could count on its internal market in order to be able to provide the necessary jobs. But the free trade agreement has two legs. It has a trade leg and it has a production leg. If we fix the trade leg, but we still trade maize and sorghum, we have not achieved the objective of, for example, employment of the youth. So we need to fix the trade leg, but this animal has two legs, and the second leg is production. So increasing the industrial and manufacturing capacities is absolutely fundamental. And it is fundamental for two reasons. The first one is that we need to learn, and as Stiglitz has repeated many times, Celestine Monga, who is a brilliant African economist, has also repeated it. We need to go through a learning curve of industrialism. And this is through the learning curve that will increase our capacity to be competitive. And in that learning curve, we'll be able to identify what are the needs in terms of skills. But the good thing, for example, done by SIFA, is that you have changed the policy design process regarding public policies on skills development by opening this space to the private sector and bringing them to interact with public actors so that the solutions can be built on an interaction and not on a top-down basis from governments, which in any case would be extremely wrong. So the CFTA is welcome, but it's not a miraculous cure but will solve all the problems if we do not do our homework in terms of the production leg.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mayaki, in your book, Africa's Critical Choices, in which you address the generation of leaders driving the continent's agenda, you present a vision for urgency by a member state to harness the youth dividend, because you've mentioned youth as one. Most of the people who are employed on the continent are young people. So as we reflect on the emergence of the African Continental the African Continental Free Trade Agreement again, what in your view will be the critical building blocks that will need to be placed to ensure that jobs are created on the continent?
First of all, it is important to mention that when we'll double our population between now and 2050, the immense majority of our population will be under 25, over 60%. So I always refer to the fact that you cannot govern societies where the median age is 19 in the same manner as you govern societies where the median age is over 40. What does it mean? It means that an organized youth will absolutely change the governance systems in which we are. Why do I refer to governance systems? Because, as you were saying in my book, I refer to the necessity to co-produce policies. The era where governments were deciding alone on how to create jobs or how to design policies, whether it is in health or education, that era is finished. And the governments who persist in that will fail. So co-producing policies means that you need to bring critical actors. And if the majority of your population is not at the table, to say these are the skills which are needed, because from our experience in the informal sector, we have gathered a certain number of conclusions related to how we access to finance, how we access to market, how we face corruption, how we access training services. So you need to bring them on board so that you think better about the whole process of creating jobs within an industrial ecosystem. Second point, which I think we do not take sufficiently into account. We refer to Africa in a kind of uniformity, but there are several Africas. East Africa is very different from Southern and from Central. If you take a country like Mali or a country like Niger, the sector that will absorb fundamentally the youth in terms of job is the agricultural sector, because even if we have a sound urbanization rate, we still have an immense, a very important part of our population in rural areas. And their main activity is agriculture. So the diversification of the rural economy is what will absorb these cohorts of youth. It's not the case in Southern Africa. In South Africa, you have job offers, but you don't have the skills necessarily. So why? Because it's a consequence of a historical system which disconnected education, all the education processes, from the labor market, because the labor market was captured. And we're not going to that. So the differences in the regions are important. So when we reflect about skills and we reflect about jobs, it's important to have in mind these differentiations. Now, beyond the differentiations and the differences, there are common traits which are essential. One, we will not be able to create the necessary jobs if we do not have a regional approach and we don't enhance regional value chains. Two, it means directly and indirectly But we cannot have 54 different industrial policies. We need to have a regional focus. And free, it means that the private sector will absolutely need to be on the table. And the private sector can be big business, it can be micro, small, and medium enterprises in the informal sector, and it can be small-scale farmers who are aiming to become micro and small entrepreneurs. So this foundation can lead to targeting the skills that will be required, but for the jobs that will insert themselves in this industrial path.
Yes, Dr. Mayaki, thank you so much for that. You mentioned two important things, the skill gaps that is widening across the continent. One other commonality is the fact that agriculture employs at least 60% of African countries, although it varies from one country to the other and one region to the other. So in your opinion, post-COVID, as we said, COVID-19 has been a big disruptor. Post-COVID, what job opportunities do you see will emerge or increase or have the potential to employ more Africans, especially the young people?
Yeah, I think certainty, speaking with certainty in this domain would be terribly hazardous. So I won't refer to certainties. Point number two, it is true that the pandemic has been a disruptor, but at the same time, the pandemic has been a revealing factor of our weaknesses. So we shouldn't look at the pandemic only as a disruptor, we should look at it also as a factor which did reveal our weaknesses. And talking about weaknesses, there are 2 points which can be enhanced. The first one is that we need to think mid and long term. We cannot think short term. The second issue is that we need to have systems in place where there is that participation of the private sector, of the youth, in order to design the proper policies. I know you would like me to say, digitalization will be a transformative dimension. Yes. I know you would like me to say that tourism can be a strong sector for creating jobs. Yes. I know you would like me to say that through digitalization, you will have opportunities in telemedicine, etc. Yes. All of this is fine. All of this is fine. But the question is, how do we face that challenge of massive numbers? Between now and 2040, roughly, we need to create 400 million jobs. 400 million jobs for youngsters who are already born and with us. So anticipation is absolutely critical. The process of designing policies by including them is absolutely essential. And not rejecting the informal sector as something negative is absolutely critical. As you know, Bill Gates was an informal entrepreneur when he started. So the informal sector needs to be looked at as a partner and not as an enemy, because the informal sector is the consequence of the lack of capacity of the states to create the necessary ecosystems for these micro and small entrepreneurs to be formal. So the sectors which are mentioned are important, but the critical point is that we will need to reflect on a regional dimension. And but at the same time, at the core of the CFTA, because the CFTA obliges us to think regionally.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayaki. As I said earlier, we have a panel made up of two esteemed guests. I would like to invite Ms. Trudy Hasenberg, who is the Executive Director of the Trade Law Center. We've heard a lot about policies. We've heard about the private sector. The private sector actually creates jobs, but we need a conducive environment, and that conducive environment comes from the policies, comes from what kind of laws we have at the national level, at the regional level, and also Dr. Mayaki is advocating for a more continental, regional and continental approach to it. So, Mrs. Trudy, in your view, what are the structural and systemic challenges member states must grapple with to create that conducive environment that will ensure that we have growth and more jobs created for the African youth?
Thank you so much, Chair. I do apologize for not being able to see you. My video has let me down rather badly, but thank you very much to Dr. Mayaki for an extremely interesting exposition. I would like to link to a few points that he has already made, and that is to start off with that we need to rethink what we mean by our industrialization agenda. Usually industrialization focuses very much on the national level, but of necessity, because we do have a number of countries that have small markets, small economies that are landlocked and face particular structural challenges. The AFCFTA makes possible, and I would say it's absolutely imperative that we look continent-wide. But also, when we take a look at the job creation issues and the challenges associated with increasing the absorptive capacity of our industries, our firms, and our sectors, we have to think economy-wide. This is not going to be resolved by looking at a particular sector only. So we need, I think, very importantly, as he has also pointed out, taking a look at governance challenges. These are very often important impediments and constraints at the national, but also at the regional and the continental level. Firstly, as far as the labor market is concerned, we have significant asymmetries of information. We have mismatch between demand and supply. So in economies, even like South Africa, where we have massive unemployment that coexists with significant skill shortages. Unless we think about a continental labor market with mobility across borders to mitigate some of those asymmetries, I think we are selling ourselves short. Very importantly, when we take a look at the issue around skills development, for example, let's take a look at some of the specificities within the AFCFTA. Colleagues, keep in mind, we are still negotiating very important aspects of that agreement. And if we take a look at the trade and services agenda, there are aspects of movement of services users and services suppliers, issues related to mutual recognition of qualifications, some of those technical sector-specific regulations, which may at this stage be hampering the search for opportunities by our young entrepreneurs in markets beyond their national geopolitical boundaries. We need to break down those barriers. I think that's extremely important to keep in mind. As Dr. Mayaki has also reminded us, the AFCFTA has a number of lives. It's a free trade area on the one hand, but on the other hand, it is also a flagship project of the African Union. And there it has to find synergy with AIDA, PIDA, CARDIP, and all of the other components of our continental development strategy, that is Agenda 2063. But we need to rethink those linkages. And this is where the dynamic benefits of the AFCFTA become particularly important. And what we are seeing at this stage, and I think this is a golden opportunity for us, is the global interest generated by the AFCFTA in Africa's markets and development opportunities. We've seen interest before, but the AFCFTA has taken that a notch up. what kind of investment are we going to be attracting to our agriculture sector, agro-processing, industrial sector, but also very importantly, let's not neglect the services sectors. And we usually stop at tourism and the usual suspects, so to speak. But the services economy has grown and developed as a result of digital transformation in ways which we could not have anticipated even 10 years ago. There are significant opportunities also for our youth entrepreneurs, because keep in mind, and I think if we take a look at the COVID impact, but some aspects of this actually predate COVID, the world of work has changed significantly. And many of our young people coming through school, universities, and training programs will not be looking for a job, but will be creating sustainable income generating opportunities, and they themselves will become part of the multiplier effect of creating other employment opportunities. So we've got to think very differently about decent jobs. We've got to think very differently where they can come from, not necessarily within our national economy. They may be across the border. And I think this means that when we take a look at the relationship between this dynamic structural set of challenges that we face and the potential that we have in the AfCFTA to address some of them, that has to be seen together with what we need to do in terms of addressing the infrastructure deficit. So if we take a look at key areas of digital infrastructure which still manifest in an enormous digital divide, that infrastructure has to be accompanied by a regulatory reform, cooperation, and harmonization agenda, which will make possible access to opportunities, either virtually, cross-border, or through the movement of persons to seek those opportunities. Keep in mind also, ladies and gentlemen, that part of the work in progress of the AfCFTA includes a protocol on youth, on women, on SME development. We have not started to develop those agendas yet. This is our opportunity to use SIFA to shape a new agenda which will address some of those systemic challenges that unfortunately have become so entrenched that we almost accept them as immutable or unchangeable. That is not the case. There's a great deal that we can do, but the foundational elements include very definitely, and I'd like to end on that point, what Dr. Mayaki has also mentioned is governance issues. And colleagues, this relates to issues around access to finance. And here we still face significant challenges for women and for youth, because access to finance is still very much conditional upon traditional modalities of collateral, for example. If we take a look at small-scale young cross-border traders on their mobile phone, ladies and gentlemen, they have a record of their clients, of the profile of products or services they provide, of payment records. That should be used as collateral to leverage trade or other finance, for example. So we've really got to think very differently that within the 21st century economy where, and I want to echo the demographic issue because this is absolutely critical. The future of the African economy and society will be shaped by individuals who are now much younger than 19 years old. And if we look at the median age as 19, ladies and gentlemen, 19-year-olds are often still at school. But at the same time, they may well be engaging in entrepreneurial activity and taking enormous societal responsibilities already. They are ready. They have the capacity to engage with policymakers to shape a new governance future for Africa's development, for sustainable, inclusive African economy and society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hasenberg, for that brilliant presentation. The protocol, as you said, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has a protocol on youth, as you said, for SME development and for the women as well. One key thing that you talked about is access to finance. And this is an important point because many young people that get involved, that create their businesses, who mostly are in the informal sector, they rely on their own resources. And we've seen a lot of innovation today with what the mobile phone can produce, the whole artificial intelligence behind it that allows some financial institutions or some microfinance institutions to give out loans to the informal sector using all the artificial intelligence, all the information that they could get from their phone usage. I would like to invite Mr. Daniel Antwi here, who is a youth champion for what he's done in Ghana. He's done great work, and he is the CEO of the African Skills Hub. There's a lot of talk about the AFCFTA. Daniel, in your work as a youth champion and being really close to these young people, is it something that is even an issue to the young people? Do they mention the AFCFTA? What are you hearing from them as part of the AFCFTA? What are some of their concerns, their hopes, and their aspirations? Is it even a conversation that the young people are having?
So first, let me say thank you, Mr. Host, for the question. Let me say good morning to everyone, and also good morning to Dr. Mayaki. Always a delight to listen to him more and more. And also thank you to Ms. Trudy for the insights from the aspect of industry and private sector. So as you mentioned, my name is Daniel. I'm from Ghana. I'm first a youth and also a youth practitioner. I lead a youth development and social enterprise oriented organization here in Ghana. We run a number of different projects, also in a few African countries. So I speak first as a youth and also as a practitioner myself. What I would say is when you look at across board, the various kinds of youth I get to, or as an organization, we get to engage. So then you have the early young startups, the graduates, the young people in it, and that is the MSMEs, the unemployed young people. These are all various kinds of youth, but I want to categorize them into the urban and the rural youth. You could see the first issue around AFCTA is really what I call the information gap or the information gap in there. So on one aspect, you have a few young people who have an idea of, have heard of it, but they really don't understand too much. They just know there is something called the Continental Free Trade Area, fine. That what comes to mind is they know it mostly and largely for young people, for large corporations to really move into trade. So all that is all what they just know of. So they could see, yes, for one section of youth, they have heard of the AFCTA, but even for those who have heard of it, their mindset and their thinking in there is, this is really for large corporations we have across the continent, just to help facilitate trade and investment for them. On the other side, we have a lot of young people, a lot of youth in the MSME, in the startup space, in the graduate space, who have not heard of the AFCTA. So those are the two different youth. Then also even for the rural youth, it's for them, they have no idea what this is. They have no idea how this will really bring inclusive growth and help them with decent living and others. So I think that is, I would say, the big issue. But the concerns here, when you look at young people as we move along, is more on the issue around sustainable employment and entrepreneurship. I think that is really the concerns as we move forward to that. But I will allow you to ask me if there are if there's any other feedback. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much coming from the youth and giving us that feedback from the young people. It seems like there's a lot of work that needs to be done to provide that information to the young entrepreneurs and to the youth on the continent. We want this webinar to be as most interactive as possible. We already are receiving some feedback, some questions from the floor. And I would like to invite Dr. Mayaki to respond here, because we are talking about creating a conducive environment, and we know that it is the role of the public sector to create that conducive environment. So what about the co-production of skill development policies with the private sector? How do you ensure public and private investment perspective and effectiveness are taken into consideration when we talk about investment?
I think it's
And then also, Dr. Maiki, I know you will be leaving soon. If you can also leave us with some parting thoughts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But I think the two preceding panelists have really contributed in a very rich manner to the debate by being extremely concrete. So let me recognize that, because I learned quite a lot from what they said. Now, the issue of co-production of policies and which kind of investment to target is linked to the role and the capacity of the governments and the states. You see, in all the discussions we are having, we tend generally to put states and governments aside and think that the way they do things and the way they behave, the way they design policies, the way they implement, is the correct way. It is not. If we, and I'm talking as a former prime minister, so it's a kind of mea culpa. It is not. They are not behaving in the correct way. So let me explain. I was referring to the fact that the informal sector was a consequence of the inadequacies of the state. Let me mention another fact that, just an example. We talk a lot about remittances. And we boast about the fact that remittances are quasi equal to ODA. Remittances are also a consequence of the inability of the state to provide public services. So these are migrants outside paying for the inadequacy and the incompetence of the states and the government to provide services. So there are concepts that we use which are, and we get used to that thinking, and we excuse the governments and the states. So in order to create the conditions for co-production of policies, the role and the capacities of the states need to be reformed. And I like very much Mariana Mazzucato. She talks about the concept of entrepreneurial state. And she highlights very clearly that Silicon Valley is a consequence of the behavior of the United States of America federal government, directly. Evidently, you had innovative entrepreneurs, but these innovative entrepreneurs had an ecosystem and had access to public procurement, so the governments facilitated that. So if governments do not have that role, evidently, it will be difficult to move towards this co-production. So co-producing not only means bringing private sector actors, but it also means reforming the role and the capacities of the states so that they are more entrepreneurial. And that brings me to the second question. Most of the civil servants that we have managing our public administration do not have a clue of what the private sector culture is. So it's not evident for them to engage with the private sector. So you will need to have a kind of flow of circulation of human resources so that the civil servants that we have at the higher level have a mind which is much more open to creating that ecosystem and that conducive environment. So let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mayaki. We'd like to thank you for your time and for giving us all this knowledge, this information, and the wisdom that comes behind it. Thank you so much.
Thanks
we know you will be leaving us, but we would like to continue the conversation with the other panelists.
Thank you.
on the
And what you're
important
doing with SIFA is fundamental because you are doing a homework which is not sufficiently done. So somehow you are contributing to reforming these governments' behaviors by making them much more entrepreneurial. So congratulations.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Mayaki.
you.
So coming back to Mrs. Trudy, we've heard a lot about entrepreneurship, about SME development, and one particular concept that I learned today and that I like from Dr. Mayaki is the entrepreneurial state. And there's also a good book that I've seen on that goes along the same route, talking about the nations of entrepreneurs. So, Mrs. Trudy, I would like to find out from you, in your opinion, what are the next most important steps to get the African Continental Free Trade Agreement from just an agreement to a booster of the African economies as far as job creation is concerned?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that's an excellent question because a free trade agreement, and this is true of the AFCFTA as well, of its own holds potential, but will not necessarily create trade by itself. And this is why there are so many complementary initiatives that are absolutely critical to the success of the AFCFTA. That said, it is of course extremely important that the AFCFTA be implemented effectively, and implementation will take place at the national level. So it is the member states of the African Union that are the negotiators of this agreement. They undertake obligations and they have to bring it home to their national jurisdictions and implement the commitments that they have undertaken. In some cases, this will require policy change, regulatory, legislative changes as well. But part of the implementation process, Chair, and I think this is absolutely critical, is providing information to all stakeholders. Access to information about the opportunities that exist in the AFCFTA is absolutely critical. And this is where, if we take a look at the particular challenges that SMEs and youth-led businesses face, large businesses can appoint a consultant to find out the relevant information about the technical compliance requirements of the AFCFTA. Smaller businesses do not have that luxury. So it is incumbent upon the entrepreneurial state to provide that information, to make it available, and also to make it accessible. And there's a difference between having a website and putting the agreement on the website and actually providing accessible information about the opportunities in the AFCFTA. The latter is what an entrepreneurial state would do. But let me for a minute reflect on some of the complementary initiatives that are extremely important for the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And these include, for example, initiatives by Afrexim Bank, Africa's Export-Import Bank. It focuses traditionally on trade finance, but it is also launching, and there's a pilot happening in the West African Monetary Zone currently, to have a Pan-African payment and settlement system to facilitate cross-border payments. This is one of those important opportunities of the economy, is the facilitation of e-cross-border payments. But we need a secure and a system with integrity to be able to manage that. And keep in mind that the transaction costs of dealing with multiple currencies can be in itself a particular constraint, particularly for small businesses. So if we are able to transact in our own currencies and via the payment platform actually expedite and reduce the transaction costs, this will bring a lot of efficiency gains and also bring much more in terms of competitiveness even to the smaller companies. Other very important complementary initiatives include also the African Trade Observatory. The African Trade Observatory is going to be an extremely important window into all the information and the opportunities of the AFCFTA that's currently being built. But there are other complementary initiatives which are equally important that we need to keep in mind. For example, Afreximbank is providing financial support to develop quality infrastructure. Now, that's so important for those small enterprises, youth-led enterprises, for example, that will be trading in food processed products, because of course they will have to meet food standards, the standards that are in the AFCFTA to protect human, plant, animal health, and very importantly also the environment. But quality infrastructure support processes are very, very limited in most of our economies, and they're extremely expensive. So building that infrastructure and that capacity across the continent can assist us to improve the quality of the products we produce, but also to make sure that they are safe for human consumption, and also safe in terms of their impact on the environment. So if we take a look at all of the support infrastructure which is necessary to make the AFCFTA successful, there are these complementary initiatives, but we should not forget the role of our business associations, our employers associations, which all will be engaging with their stakeholder communities about the benefits, but also some of the risks that are associated with the AFCFTA, because there will be risks. As we open our markets, we will get more competition in what could have been our domestic traditional markets. And that's a shakeup very often where the losers are the smaller enterprises and the gainers will be the larger enterprises. Keep in mind also, while we welcome foreign direct investment, it's absolutely essential to expand and diversify our productive capacity. It will also mean that if those foreign investors establish a commercial presence in one of the state parties to the AFCFTA, they get all the benefits of the AFCFTA. So there could be an increased level of competition in the market. And very often that will be quite difficult for the small and medium enterprises to negotiate their way around. So there's a great deal to be done. It has to be a collective, comprehensive, and very carefully thought through in compact of initiatives to support the achievement of the AFCFTA objectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Trudy. Yeah, you put it right that to have this trade agreement actually go from just an agreement to boosting our economies, we have to look at the whole ecosystem. Every component of that ecosystem has a role to play, whether it is all the initiatives that you have listed from the private sector coming from commercial banks or financial institutions to the right policy environment that we expect from our government, to the role even of the SMEs and the young people that are active in this space. So we all need to work together. So I would like to ask Daniel. Daniel, it's, as I said earlier, is a youth champion, and Daniel, you are an influencer at a global stage. You also a youth development practitioner in Ghana, which is your country. So I would like to find out from you, what role do you see institutions such as the African Union Commission or the AUDA NEPAD, what role do you see them playing in this space? What are your expectations as a young person and someone who is actively investing in your country?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Host. It's such a very interesting question, and I love that. So I think for the roles of stakeholders, for me, the most important stakeholder to drive this agenda of job creation is governments and states. So I loved what Dr. Mayaki mentioned, that is entrepreneurial state mindset. But he also made a profound statement in here that the AFCTA thrives on two legs. So one is on trade and the other is on production. And the first question here is, what are we going to trade on if we have nothing to produce? And so then governments have to really begin to move from the economy of consumption into the economy of production. And production here means there should be clear roadmaps in helping various countries to really move towards engaging more in production. And when I say production here, what I'm trying to mean here is a roadmap around, for example, a sector roadmap. So countries on the continent now really need to begin to identify what are the various sectors of interest to them, sectors that can create jobs. If we want to look at the the East Asian model, for example, yes, they delve a lot in. But for the 21st century, what can African countries do? So then a sector roadmap such as looking at agriculture is key. We've mentioned that already. Manufacturing is always another driver. The interesting thing about manufacturing is there are a lot of low-skilled levels that can be employed in that space, because you don't need a lot of skills to be in, for example, an apple juice factory. Obviously, there are chains of skilled laborers that will be needed, but informal people can also be part of such a factory when it comes to manufacturing. So manufacturing is an interesting sector, agriculture. Then the services sector, when you look at the GDP of our various countries on the continent, services is really becoming the front liner in all our various GDPs on the continent. So then I think on services, we have to really be very intentional with how we develop our services sector. So the orange economy, the silver economy, which is the digital space, the blue economy on healthcare, the tourism, the creative economy. How do we really develop that? And for this, you need government to step in first. Government has to really be keen on that. So that is what I call the sector roadmap. Then the next thing will be the policy roadmap. Obviously, policy is really the outlook. Policy really determines the outlook of every country, every economy. And so then that is what guides action into. It's a guide that helps actions in countries. And so then you need youth-centered policies that are centered on youth. That is very important. So what are policies that are centered on youth job creation, which is very key by government in there. Then also policies that are private sector friendly. And a clear example would be, let's say, a tax incentives for early young businesses. We know the hurdles for young businesses in there. So issues around access to market, access to capital, and access to finance, access to business support, and even access to investment. So then government may have to be very intentional about coming up with very youth-centered policies that will really help accommodate a lot of young people into entrepreneurship, into employment. I think that is on the policy roadmap. And the last thing will be on the industrial roadmap. Industrial roadmap, government again have to be the fourth runner. Madam Trudy mentioned on the need of industrialization and digitalization agenda, but you could see for anything about industrialization, digitalization, infrastructure is key there. And so then who has to set up all this infrastructure? Who has to create the enabling infrastructure and environment? And that is the role of government in there. So government, I think the first stakeholder in the job creation agenda is government. Then you come to partners like UDANEPAD, as well as UDANEPAD and the AU and other partners. I think I'm happy one of the third phase of the protocols looks at a woman in trade, and also a youth in trade. That is a protocol centered on youth. But I think the most important thing is there should be a clear, structured women's directorate and a youth directorate. I'm saying this because the two most important beneficiaries for the AFCTA will be youth and women. No two ways about that. But how do we ensure they are both implementers and beneficiaries? And so then that is where organizations like DANEPAD and AU and others comes in to play a big role in there, ensuring they play this role. There is a women's directorate, there is a youth directorate leading the agenda, ensuring all our policies are a bit youth AFCTA focused, women AFCTA focused. I think that is the biggest thing I would need with an EPAD and others to do. Another thing I believe they can also do in there will be the need to make the advocacy around countries focusing on their comparative advantage. And I was happy Dr. Mayaki did mention a bit on that. The need for, because we can't have productions across, imagine Ghana, everyone, so Ghana, yes, our biggest comparative advantage is cocoa, for example. Imagine all the 54 countries are producing cocoa. That is really not necessary. So then if Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, for example, could be the best country to produce cocoa, chocolate, anything cocoa and chocolate across the whole continent. So then that is a comparative advantage zone specific for some specific countries. It creates a lot of jobs. It creates a lot of access to markets. It creates a lot of investment opportunities. So those are some of the things that comes to mind. For young people and for youth, I think our role is very easy in there. First, most important role is to ensure that we are part of the process from the onset. So I'm happy there is a secretariat looking at all that. We should be part of the process from the onset, process with decision making, process with the various involvement and participation on the youth-focused, youth-centered AFCTA. Then another thing is obviously for young people, I believe that is a new normal. Recently in Ghana, the biggest news this whole week is a statement by our finance minister who mentioned government payroll is full. And so the only option now for young people is, that is the biggest news this finance minister. So what it means is entrepreneurship is the new normal for young people, not for Ghanaians alone, but for African youth. And so we have no other option than to embrace entrepreneurship. Embracing entrepreneurship means we have to go out there, take the risks, obviously hope to get a right platform and atmosphere just to thrive. And so, yeah, so that is what I'll say so far.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So many things came out of what you just said. I would like to encourage the esteemed participants online to please use the chat function or the Q&A to ask your question. We will try as much as possible to address some of these questions. Daniel said it right, policies is the outlook. We need youth-centered policy. And he said also that entrepreneurship is a new normal. But we also know that we've been talking about the informality of our economies, and out of, I think about 79% of the people who are in the informal sectors are entrepreneurs. So what Daniel just said, is actually what we've found out from many studies that we have undertaken at Cipher. So one last question to Ms. Trudy. And we, as we're saying that entrepreneurship is a new normal, it means also that we need skills. So in your opinion, how should skills development policies respond to the prospect of jobs as markets are now expanding or will be expanding across borders, given the reality of the Continental Free Trade Agreement?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's also a question related to this in the Q&A about skills development and internships. I think if we take a look at the skills that are needed by a 21st century African economy, they are very, very different to the skills production pipeline that is still predominant in most of our countries through the formal learning processes. In many of our schools and universities, we are still developing skills which are no longer in demand and no longer appropriate, but at the same time, not bringing on board the skills development, the entrepreneurial facilitation and learning by doing, which is so important to have flexibility, to have soft skills. I think some of the things that we are very, very familiar with have not become endemic, not become systematized in our training processes. There is still a preoccupation with academic training, and I would very, very strongly encourage that we think very broadly about training and skills development opportunities in the private sector, the learning processes within companies. And this requires that we think differently about qualifications frameworks. So there are some very important structural systemic issues that we need to take on board when we take a look at the skills development strategy for the African economy going forward. I mean, many young people have learned to use a mobile phone or other tech equipment simply by learning and doing and watching others. They have no qualification to testify to the fact that they have those skills. And therefore, when we take a look at how this will be opening job opportunities, we need to think very, very differently about the traditional approaches that we have to screening, to the qualifications requirements for job opportunities and so on. But linking also the infrastructure challenge, many of our schools simply don't have equipment to be able to provide the opportunities to facilitate that training. In some countries, we now see training programs in coding, excuse me, for young women, for young girls. I think this is absolutely critical that we move in that direction. But we also need to look at some of the traditional areas, the mathematics, the science, technology, because the biggest challenge for our continent is, of course, climate. And this is something which is not yet fully embraced in the AFCFTA agenda, and it's not fully embraced also in our learning agenda. So this is an area where taking a look at sustainability in terms of various training initiatives, but also training about aspects of sustainability for longevity in terms of your career as a working or entrepreneurial individual in an African economy is particularly important. So the broad area of sustainable development is not fully incorporated in our training programs. And that again needs to be systematized in on-the-job training, but also in our school, our university curricula. So these are the basic currencies that young entrepreneurs, young workers who will be taking up jobs in other enterprises are going to need for the future. But I would strongly encourage that we look rather differently at the recognition of qualifications, because there is still significant value attached to academic training rather than technical training. And in a digital economy, it is very often that technical training which will enable entrepreneurial activities to be started up by young people and others, but they may not necessarily have a certificate. So when it comes again to access to finance, access to government support services and so on, they may be at a disadvantage. So it requires rethinking how we think about skills, about training, about capacity development. And lifelong learning has to be systematized into all the processes of training and learning on the continent. None of us are fully trained ever. We have to keep learning and adapting. So adaptability becomes particularly important skill, flexibility, responsiveness, learning, and the very important human skills. So humanity, sustainability, inclusion are absolutely what needs to become the way we learn, how we learn, and what we learn for a future of a sustainable continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trudy. I don't have access to the questions on the chat, but I would like to give 1 or 2 minutes to each member of the panel to address some of the questions that have come from the floor, if there are any. I'm just looking at my colleagues. Okay, so we will address some of them maybe in the closing remarks. But I would like to ask Daniel if he has any parting thoughts in 1 minute before we proceed to the closing remarks.
Dr. Mayaki made mention of the statement that we need about 400 million jobs from now to 2040 to fill this gap. And 400 million, 2040, that tells us practically we are just 18 years away. 2014, we are just 18 years away from 2040. And when you look at by 2040, the population will be around, let's say, a little over about 2.5 billion. And that is a lot of young people, a lot of young people in this population on the continent. We have no option. Governments have to really take the bull by its horns and really begin to look at driving the production agenda, because the AFCTA trade is beautiful, but what do you trade if you have nothing to produce? And so then young people in there will also have to begin to just embrace entrepreneurship as a new normal here. I believe our biggest resources we bring on board is our energy. Our energy, positive energy in there is our biggest resource. How do we bring that to the table? How do we use this energy with creativity? Madam Trudy mentioned the 21st century skills. So energy with creativity, energy with problem solving skills, take the bull by its horns, young people, take the risks in there and begin to make it happen for our continent. I believe that those are my parting thoughts as I say thank you.
Trade is important, but we need production, because without production, we can't trade anything. So, Trudy, is it something that you agree with, and what else can you add to this strong statement, knowing that also from the youth voice, entrepreneurship is a new normal?
Thank you very much, Chair. I absolutely agree. Entrepreneurship is the new currency for the 21st century sustainable development for our economies. Extremely important that we keep in mind what will assist young people to be able to fulfill their rightful role as entrepreneurs. And I think this is absolutely where government, civil society, organizations like AUDA, NEPAD, African Union Commission, the AFCFTA Secretariat can all come together to inspire our young people. But we also have to offer them opportunities. And someone in the chat room asked about internships. There's so much we can learn by doing, by having an opportunity, just having a foot in the doorway. And this is particularly important for all our corporations, for all our civil society organizations, to offer opportunities, to open doors for our young people. All they need is a foot in the doorway, and they will inspire all of us with their creativity, their productivity, and their contributions to our productive capacity and to achieving the goals of the AFCFTA and the African Union.
Thank you very much, Ms. Trudy. As a continent leading implementation agency, we did get some guidance from the CEO of AUDA NEPAD. Unfortunately, he had to leave us because of some other pressing commitments. We are getting close to the end of this this 90-minute session, and I would like to invite Mr. Ernst Usted, who is the program director of the SIFA. SIFA is the Skills Initiative for Africa, which is the driving force behind all this work. SIFA has undertaken a lot of work, as I said earlier, a lot of studies. And the African Create Jobs that is happening soon in the next 2 weeks is a joint effort between the SIFA project, AUDA NEPAD, and the African Union Commission. I would like to invite Ernst to say a few words and probably to address some of the questions that have been posed by the esteemed participants. Welcome, Ernst.
Okay, thank you, Eric. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Daniel, and I'd like to thank you, Trudy, for your remarks. We have already thanked Dr. Mayaki for his input. Before I come to my closing remarks, there was one question in the chat asking about any plans from AUDA for youth development programs like internships, since most of the vacancies require high experience, which most of us do not qualify to, and I can tell you that I completely share that view. Most of the things that I've learned in my life, I have not learned at university. or at school level, most of the things that I've learned was why actually working. And so we have now 2 former interns working for the SIFA programs. They started as interns. One is in the room and has organized that session. And we have currently 2 other interns working because I strongly believe in internship programs and workplace learning, because that's where you are getting up to date. So you learn the social skills, the entrepreneurial skills, the room to shape your working environment in a way that you cannot do by going to university. And that is also a reason why the next upcoming phase of SIFA will probably strongly look at workplace learning, internships, apprenticeships as not a new but an underdeveloped tool for skills development in Africa. This was a very rich debate. We touched a number of issues from the 2 legs, the trade legs, the production legs, the different sectors, the interaction, infrastructure, and so on. It is just the start of the debate. The debate will continue, and the next step for the continuing the debate will be the 3rd and 4th of November, where we have the African Create Jobs Conference, and I hope all of you will be there and follow the debate and engage in that debate. It's a long way for the African continent to go. I'm coming from Europe. European Union is also 50 years now. We are developing over time, but the first steps have been taken, so I'm optimistic that we will get more productivity, we will get more trade, we will get more production, and in the end we will also get more employment for African youth. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Ernst. Before leaving, we have about 1 minute to the end. I would like to thank all the participants who made the time to listen to all the esteemed panelists that we had. We did receive a lot of wisdom from Dr. Mayaki, a lot of advice, a lot of guidance for the African Create Jobs. That was the objective of this brown bag session. I would also like to thank Ms. Trudy and Mr. Daniel for all the knowledge that you were able to share with us and all the participants. I would like to thank the production team. There's a whole team here that has enabled this brown bag session today. And last but not least, the SIFA team and the communication team, the IT team. You've been all wonderful. Thank you very much. And looking forward to seeing you at the African Create Jobs on 3rd and 4th of November. Thank you.